thanks for having me. And I think it's an exciting moment like this that you go back and remember where you started. And I remember when my first book came out back in 1999, I had to do my first reading, and it was at a small town which will remain nameless. And everyone said, oh, it's going to be great. It's a great arts community. They love reading. They love books. They love writers. And of course, I went there to do my reading, and no one turned up. And it's not even the best part. The best part is that the librarian still made me read from my book just to her. And that sort of failure and humiliation seemed like a fitting way for me to start my writing career, because every success I've ever had has come wrapped in a gift box of failure. And it just seems fitting because when you think about it, it wasn't a great political leader or mathematician or scientist who said, fail again, fail better. It was Samuel Beckett, one of the great writers in the writing pantheon. And so it seems to suit a writer to feel that way. And some of you might know a writer, and I'm sure the experience most of the time is like this. We are the most miserable people on the planet, and we enjoy every minute of it. And so I'm starting to think, how do books actually get written by these people? And I'm starting to also wonder, well, maybe the adage that positive thinking is what we need doesn't always ring true. Maybe what we need sometimes is just a little bit of negative thinking. And that's what I'm going to try to convince you of today, how failure has actually been my friend. And it really has. And I'm going to give you two examples, one from when I was 8 years old and one from when I was 28. And we'll see how we go. Now, when I was 8 and growing up in the cultural mecca of the Sutherland Shire, there were two things that were really important to me. One was football in winter, and the other was athletics in summer, and more specifically, throwing the discus. That was what I was obsessed with every summer. And when I was 8, I went to the zone championships, which was a big deal. And I went there for one reason, to all these other competing athletic clubs coming together. I went there to win the discus. And I could do the spin. I was skinny as a stick, but somehow I could throw the discus out there. And when I got to the ground that day, I was confronted by something I'd never seen before. The discus circle there had a big iron cage around it, a big net. And it totally freaked me out. And I went into the circle to do my 3 initial throws, and the first one just went flying straight into the net. The second one, as I got more anxious, again, another foul. And the third one, I was already distraught. And I did the spin, the discus came out totally wrong and went into the net for the third time. And I walked out of the discus circle bawling my eyes out. My whole family was there, my mum, my dad, my brother, my 2 sisters. My dad was further away because he was, I don't know, helping out at the shot put or something. And he came towards us as we disconsolately walked towards him. And he held out his arms as if to say, what happened? And one of my sisters, as only an older sibling can do, she's yelled out at the top of her voice, just to make it nice and official, 3 fouls. And you can imagine my head just dropped even lower. I started bawling even harder. And that was one of the great failures as an 8-year-old. And now the writer in me who likes to indulge in a bit of failure, I like to imagine a plane going by with the skywriting behind it, and it doesn't say any advertisement or anything, it just says 3 fouls. Or I get home, turn on the TV, and there's the news, and it's Roger Klimpson or Brian Henderson or Richard Moorcroft saying, well, today at Sylvania Athletics Field, there was a great tragedy. 8-year-old Markus Zusak went to win the discus, and he failed miserably. He threw 3 fouls. And not only that, he didn't cope with it very well. Cuts to me, bawling my eyes out at the fence. And so there you have not only failure, but failure to cope with the failure. So it's failure on top of failure, which is a pretty good debut for your career in failure. And so I started to wonder then, did that failure do anything for me? And it definitely did. The next year in the under-9s, the zone championships, I pestered my dad for the month leading up to it to go and practice at the field there. And he took me there. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon before the zone championships, it started to rain. And at that point, we sat in his combi van. He was in his painting overalls. My dad was a house painter with his Tic Tacs in the bib. And he gave me a Tic Tac. He took one silently. We got out of the car and I practiced in the pouring rain over and over again. I must have thrown the discus 100 times that day until finally, soaked to the bone, my dad held the discus in his hand and said, "I think you've done enough." And I had. That weekend, I don't remember winning, but I know I got through to the regionals, and that was massive, all right? And I had somehow succeeded, and why? Because that original failure had given me the motivation to do so much better. And on top of that, it gave me that beautiful moment with my dad throwing the discus in the rain, and I'm grateful for it to this day. And so we go from the 8-year-old throwing the discus to the 28-year-old. And of course, in the 20 years between, there were successes and failures and everything in between. I'd become a writer. I'd written 4 books that had been published and many others that had been roundly rejected by every publisher in the country. And I sat down then to write my 5th book. And it was going to be a very different book for me. It was going to be set in Nazi Germany. It would be narrated by death. And on top of that, I was really worried. It was going to be called The Book Thief, and I thought, no one's going to read this book. To this day, I'm grateful to people for recommending it to their friends, because the friend says, well, what's it about? And you've got to say, well, it's set in Nazi Germany, it's narrated by death, nearly everyone dies, and it's 580 pages long. You'll love it. And at the time when I was writing it, I thought, no one's going to read it, so I might as well write it exactly how I want to. That little bit of negative thinking gave me the courage to follow my own vision completely. And that's what I did. I sat down, I started, I used death as the narrator, and he was this really sadistic, macabre sort of voice. And I had a problem. I'd written 200 pages that had just failed flatly. And here's the thing with writers. Everyone thinks that to be a writer, you've got to have a great imagination. You don't. You just have to have a lot of problems, clearly. And it's getting around those problems that gives you the power to imagine. You've got to imagine your way around them. And so I thought, death isn't working. Let's imagine that Liesl, the main character, is the narrator. Now I had a new problem. After several months of failure, Liesl was, despite my German and Austrian background, the most Australian-sounding German girl in the history of books. And so I thought, that's not working. Let's go to third-person narration. But that was a failure in itself because that wasn't following my vision. So I thought, let's bring death back, but now let's imagine differently. What if death isn't macabre and sadistic and enjoying his work, cleaning up all these souls? What if he's actually vulnerable? What if he's really tired? And what if he's haunted by us? And he's proving to himself that humans can actually be beautiful and selfless and worthwhile by telling this story. And when I started again with that voice, I wrote all the way through to the end with about 1,000 more failures in between. I failed with the characters and the plot points and the overall structure and the images and the chapters and the chapter headings and the parts. Everything you could imagine failing on, I did. If you could imagine it like a sea of paper coming and filling this whole stage up to my knees, that's how many times I failed. There were 15 pages of failure here, 25 over there, 150 over there, a few miserable sentences, in between. But what I found with that problem was that all of those failures had one tiny success in them, but not for that pile of pages, for the pile of pages over here, or the character on that side who just wasn't working. And slowly I cobbled the whole thing together by overcoming those failures and all those problems that I had. And in that sense, if it had all gone smoothly, I would have had a 200-page book that really meant something to me. But because of getting around all those problems and all those failures, I had a 580-page book that meant everything to me. And that's what made all the difference. So I wonder now if failure has given me anything. It definitely has. It's given me a greater motivation to succeed next time. It's given me a beautiful afternoon throwing the discus in the pouring rain with my dad, who was addicted to Tic Tacs. It's given me the power to imagine my way around problems, and it's given me the courage to follow my own vision completely. And in that sense, I'm going to finish with two quotes, and don't worry, they're not from writers, so they won't be really depressing. One is from a football coach, Wayne Bennett, who said about his players, "You've got to let them go to the dark places. Otherwise, they'll never find out how good they are." And the other is the famous quote from Theodore Roosevelt, who said, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who strives valiantly, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error. If he fails, at least he fails daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." And for me, you probably realise my favourite word in that quote is arena. And sometimes I feel like the writing space is an arena. And when I walk into it, I want there to be failure in the air, because when it's there, I think you have a greater respect, not only for the task at hand, but for yourself, for your willingness to stare into that failure. And so sometimes my desk is only that, it's just a desk. But sometimes it's a discus net in the pouring rain, and I throw and I throw and I throw until finally a voice comes back saying, "I think you've done enough." Thanks for having me.